Hey gang, thanks for stopping by. Hope you guys are having a great day or a great night, wherever you're at. I love you all. So this video is for all the skeptics out there that still don't believe in what's called weather manipulation, weather control. But it can't be controlled, in my opinion. It can be manipulated. And there's proof that it's been manipulated for years. These are pictures from a very interesting article that I found that I highly recommend you pause and screenshot and read as you have time. And then right after this is a video that I recorded of the radar from a very violent storm that we had last week blow through all of Oklahoma, Missouri, Illinois, and on and on and on. And I found something very interesting, and I've added nothing to this video. So just watch and tell me about weather manipulation without saying weather manipulation. Here it is. Enjoy the video, y'all. Talk to you soon.
Mr. President, honored delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we shall propose further cooperative efforts between all the nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control.
Remarks the President to the National Academy of Science from Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C., October 22, 1963.
And third, there is the atmosphere itself, the atmosphere in which we live and breathe and which makes life on this planet possible. Scientists have studied the atmosphere for many decades, but its problems continue to defy us. The reasons for our limited progress are obvious. Weather cannot be easily reproduced and observed in the laboratory. It must therefore be studied in all of its violence wherever it has its way. Here is an oceanography. New scientific tools have become available with modern computers, rockets, and satellites. The time is ripe to harness a variety of disciplines for a concerted attack. And even more than oceanography, the atmospheric sciences require worldwide observation and hence international cooperation. Some of our most successful international efforts have involved the study of the atmosphere. We all know that the World Meteorological Organization has been effective in this field. It is now developing a worldwide weather system to which nations the world over can make their contribution. Such cooperative undertakings can challenge the world's best efforts for decades to come. And fourth, I would mention a problem which I know has greatly concerned many of you. That is our responsibility to control the effects of our own scientific experiments. For as science investigates the natural environment, it also modifies it. And that modification may have incalculable consequences for evil as well as for good. In the past, the problem of conservation has been mainly the problem of human waste, of natural resources, of their destruction. But science has the power for the first time in history now to undertake experiments with premeditation which can irreversibly alter our biological and physical environment on a global scale. The problem is difficult because it is hard to know in advance whether the cumulative effects of a particular experiment will help or harm mankind. In the case of nuclear testing, the world is satisfied that radioactive contamination involves unnecessary risks, and we are all heartened that more than 100 nations have joined to outlaw testing in environments where the effects most directly threaten mankind. In other fields, we may be less sure. We must, for example, balance the gains of weather modification against the hazards of protracted drought or storm. The government has the clear responsibility to weigh the importance of large-scale experiments to the advance of knowledge or to national security against the possibility of adverse and destructive effects. The scientific community must assist the government in arriving at rational judgments and interpreting these issues to the public. To deal with this problem, we have worked out formal procedures within the government to assure expert review before potentially risky experiments are undertaken. And we will make every effort to publish the data needed to permit open examination and discussion of proposed experiments by the scientific community before they are authorized. If science is to press ahead in the four fields that I have mentioned, if it is to continue to grow in effectiveness and productivity, our society must provide scientific inquiry the necessary means of sustenance. We must, in short, support it. Military and space needs, for example, offer little justification for much work in what Joseph Henry called abstract science. Though such fundamental inquiry is essential to the future technological vitality of industry and government alike, it is usually more difficult to comprehend than applied activity, and as a consequence, often seems harder to justify to the Congress, to the executive branch, and to the people. But if basic research is to be properly regarded, it must be better understood. I ask you to reflect on this problem and on the means by which in the years to come our society can assure continuing backing to fundamental research in the life sciences, the physical sciences, the social sciences, on natural resources, on agriculture, on protection against pollution and erosion. Together, the scientific community, the government, industry, and education must work out the way to nourish American science in all its power and vitality. Even this year, we have already seen in the first actions of the House of Representatives some failure of support for important areas of research which must depend on the national government. I'm hopeful that the Senate of the United States will restore these funds. What it needs, of course, is a wider understanding by the country as a whole of the value of this work, which has been so sustained by so many of you. I would not close, however, on a gloomy note, for ours is a century of scientific conquest and scientific triumph. If scientific discovery has not been an unalloyed blessing, if it has only conferred on mankind the power not only to create, but also to annihilate, it has at the same time provided humanity with a supreme challenge and a supreme testing. If the challenge and the testing are too much for humanity, then we're all doomed. But I believe that the future can be bright, and I believe it can be certain. Man is still the master of his own fate, and I believe that the power of science and the responsibility of science have offered mankind a new opportunity, not only for intellectual growth, but for moral discipline, not only for the acquisition of knowledge, but for the strengthening of our nerve and our will. We are bound to grope for a time as we grapple with problems without precedent in human history. But wisdom is the child of experience. In the years since man unlocked the power stored within the atom, the world has made progress, halting but effective, towards bringing that power under human control.
It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world. And ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
And fourth, I would mention a problem which I know has greatly concerned many of you. That is our responsibility to control the effects of our own scientific experiments. For as science investigates the natural environment, it also modifies it. And that modification may have incalculable consequences for evil as well as for good.
Tropical storm Harvey is pummeling southern Texas.
We're live here in Houston, where Harvey's rains keep coming.
It's not the initial impact, but the flooding.
Record-shattering rain, massive flooding, families stranded.
Waters keep rising.
This is just the beginning.
Hi, if anybody's out there and can hear us, please help.
I need a rescue. These are 3 kids, no food or water.
Do we have anyone in the Friendship area?
Where's that Humble address at? What's the Humble address where they're trying to let the
There's been a report of another 5 foot of water about to pour out of Baker Dam.
I-10 in Normandy, we need help. Families are going under with the current.
Need strong
the boats are capsizing.
I-10 in Normandy, families are on these boats.
They need boats out there.
They said a white truck went under the water. So and I'm like, well, it can't be him because he into my house. Also, I kept calling his wife, dialing 911, and no response. I kept calling him, no response.
Hi, ma'am. This is Texas Game Warden Carmen Rickle. It's my understanding that you guys have called to be evacuated from your residence. Is that correct? Do you know the condition of the water around the house?
I don't know yet.
Stand by. We're going to try to get somebody out there to help you.
I mean, lasers? Really? To change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning. Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds.
Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong.
Cross-beam over-the-horizon radars, such as the giant Soviet woodpecker transmitters, are ideal for use as carriers of wires for distant, time-reversed wave interferometry. A return time-reversed signal of extreme power can be delivered directly to that target. Almost all of the transmitted time-reversed wave energy will arrive at and in that distant target, even through a highly nonlinear medium or under scattering conditions. Hardly any of the energy will be lost en route. If the target is fast-moving, a lead correction signal can be calculated and added to steer the return path. Second, real-time holography can readily be accomplished using time-reversed waves and without first making holograms. In addition, by using pumped four-wave mixing, as much energy as one desires can be placed into the distant hologram, including even negative energy, which cancels an equal amount of positive energy. Powerful geometrical forms, balls, shapes, hemispherical shells, and so forth, of electromagnetic energy can be created at a distance quite readily by interferometry or crossed beam techniques using time-reversed waves. Since the TR wave carriers do not disperse with distance, these interference energy forms can be assembled by crossing TR wave beams at great distances, even at thousands of miles. Now, beginning in July 1976, powerful new Soviet over-the-horizon radars, the infamous woodpeckers, became operational. Extensive weather engineering over the U.S. has been accomplished by these weapon systems. Now, this has been separately documented by the present author, by C.B. Baker, editor of Youth Action News, Andrew Mikrowski of Canada's Planetary Association for Clean Energy, and other researchers such as Andrea Puharich.
And I have no interest in the Nazis, frankly, except as a historical aberration of the human spirit, where, you know, some group thinks they really are superior and have to prove it by clobbering everybody who is not superior and slaughtering some 40 million people in the process. So I would say that the only reason that I take any interest in this is like studying pathology, you know, getting into the diseases of mankind, and it's kind of sickening process. But the only reason I pursue it is that I'm sorry to say that the neo-Nazis are very much alive and well, and I've run into them. As a matter of fact, their headquarters are in England, and they're financed, believe it or not, by a huge trust left by the Shah of Iran's family. And in England it has one name, and it's not in Iran anymore because that was taken over by the revolutionary Iranians. But they are very much alive and well, and their current program, the reason I know this is to know where I get my facts from, is for some reason or other, even though I'm of Slavic origin, the Germans think I'm hot stuff in this area of the occult and all this stuff, and they've wooed me for years, but in very subtle ways. And they wanted me to be the research director of their foundation in England, which the parent foundation set up by actually the Shah of Iran's mother. It's called the Darius Foundation, from the great Persian leader Darius. And the one in England was called Threshold Foundation. They've changed the name of that, and they've, when they were kind of not exposed but discovered for what they were doing. And there was a Prince Shahram, who is a nephew of the late Shah of Iran, who runs the English thing. And so I got this, I let him wine and dine me until I could ascertain exactly what they were up to and their Nazi connections and so on and so on. And what I found out was the following: that they still want to take over the world, but they figure it's costly to do it with military operations. And the way to do it is to, you all know about the planetary grid. It's It's a structure, kind of a geodesic structure of the planet in which there are certain power centers, and they all form a very elaborate link. You can read about it in the magazine called Pursuit. They've run about 3 stories on it in the last 2 years. Anyway, this planetary grid, if you are on a power center, and there are several hundred of these power centers, you can then use occult influence, which means you use somebody who's a very powerful sender of thoughts and energy, and from that point you radiate out your thoughts, and influence people without their knowing they're being influenced. So this is the current program of the neo-Nazis to take over the world. And what they do is, if the power center they locate, according to their own grid, is on land, they will try to find exactly where it is, actually go out and do the survey, and then they buy that land, and they put one of their people on there who is a very highly trained psychic. And they're buying up property all over the planet this way, and I knew the guy in England who was in charge of that particular operation. And this is what drove all the scientists nuts in 1976 when the Russians first came on the air with the ELF signals being sent out from Russia. What drove them crazy was, here's a wave that can go through the entire Earth without being attenuated. In other words, it doesn't lose any energy to any surrounding system. And yet when it hits a human head or a body, it does interact and the signal is absorbed. This soliton is picked up. And it's taken 7 years of research, particularly by the Navy, to find out that this hydrogen bond here is sensitive to frequency. And there are certain very critical frequencies, like 7.82 is a good frequency. It actually reinforces the integrity of DNA.
And they make a deal that the Mossad lets me go, releases me. And in 1972, straight to Palo Alto, California, to Stanford Research Institute. And that's where Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and Edgar Mitchell and all those scientists who had very direct links to the CIA, they set up the experiments with me. So that was the beginning.
This film describes a 5-week investigation conducted at Stanford Research Institute with Uri Geller, a young Israeli. The film portrays a...
You have so many here, Andre. Which one is
Oh, these are for you. These are... Chew them well when you ingest. Lower your head a little bit. A little more. Now.
Oh, I see it. Now I see it.
All right, same way. Start with your left hand and try to find the one in this row. Well, there were a number of things that I was involved in all that craziness. But the first thing was our military, we did a lot of briefings at the Pentagon, couldn't believe that this simple scheme would do what the Russians are doing. So they had to put up a lot of money and duplicate it first. Then they found out, yeah, the Russians are doing it, Tesla was right, etc., etc. Once they got them going, then they want to know how this little toy works, right? You have to see if you can knock out installations in the Soviet Union, whether they're having their people go nuts or some people are going here, whether disease occurs. So they built one that was at Alice Springs, Australia, a big secret Australian research. So that, then they had to have another one, so they put up another one in South Africa, which is one of the reasons we have friendly relations with South Africa, in case you're interested, because they tolerate our presence there, because from a base in South Africa you can hit a certain part of the Soviet Union that's of great interest to them. And now we got another one going up in Antarctica. So anyways, the damn thing escalates.
And now we got another one going up in Antarctica.
What? I mean, is there anything else going on down there? I mean, we just went through a lot of stuff here.
Yes, actually.
There's a system known as ELF, extra low frequency. It's also a massive antenna that's embedded in the ice there. When I arrived to the facility as a tradesman and firefighter, I was read into how everything worked because I needed for the safety of my crew to be able to battle fires and engage things appropriately. And at the onset, I was told that the ELF system is off. It's defunct, it's disabled, it is just sitting dead in the ice. But through my need to make an additional repair on something else and tracing back to a sub panel, I was finding the circuit that I needed to lock out, tag out, and do all the safe repairs. But then I noticed that this other breaker that was supposed to be off was in the on position, and it was listed as the ELF. And I ran it up my chain. I said, what's going on here? I said, this is supposed to be off. I was told it's off now. And I was just given a hard, it's on. And that was the end of my need to know. They didn't want to tell me anything else. You have identified the circuit that you need to work on. You have been informed that you can safely do your job. Carry on. So I did my job. I made the repair that I needed to on the circuit next to the circuit that I was now informed is duly on and operating. So the ELF is up and running, and that, again, is a multifaceted directed energy weapons platform.
There's also something called DNA, which we can just show as a kind of a double spiral like this. There are two threads of material that go parallel to each other, and that these two threads are held together, and I'll make a little picture here, by a hydrogen bond. And actually the bond looks like this. It's carbon, 2 dots, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. This is the bond. One carbon is in one DNA molecule, the nitrogen is in the other one, and there's this oxygen and this hydrogen. And this is the target of all the ELF signals. Now, listen to this paradox. This is what drove all the scientists nuts in 1976 when the Russians first came on the air with the ELF signals being sent out from Russia. What drove them crazy was, here's a wave that can go through the entire Earth without being attenuated. In other words, it doesn't lose any energy to any surrounding system. And yet when it hits a human head or a body, it does interact and the signal is absorbed. This soliton is picked up. And it's taken 7 years of research, particularly by the Navy, to find out that this hydrogen bond here is sensitive to frequency. And there are certain very critical frequencies, like 7.82 is a good frequency. It actually reinforces the integrity of DNA. But the mystery was why there's a radio signal coming, magnetic, ELF magnetic field, it stands for extremely low frequency. Why will it be stopped by a body, a plant, a paramecium, anything? It's because the DNA in every cell, in every living creature, is like a radio receiver for these magnetic waves. And we've now found out that, and I mentioned this in the cancer lecture, that if you beam at a human being or an animal where all the experiments are done, a signal of 3.21 hertz for 2 days in connection with certain chemicals in the body called protein kinases, the net result is cancer. It's that quick. If I beam an individual, and I can do this, and I've done it on myself, I've done it on others, with 6.66 hertz, and it has to be out to 2 decimal points, I affect your DNA in your brain so it puts out neuropeptides, which are called cholinergic group of, and you get depressed, and you can get very depressed. Fact is, I have found a frequency, which I've never revealed to anybody, which is somewhere in here where I can kill creatures.
Oh, look at that. This square area here, this is the lower meadow.
That's clearly artificial. That looks like a phased array.
Sure does.
Looks like a phased array antenna system built under the ground. You see where I'm going with this, Eric? Mm-hmm. We've heard rumors that certain low frequencies in that range could be used to not only detect UAPs, but possibly even take them down. But I never knew them to bury them. They were always on the surface.
Like a low frequency beam or something?
Well, just phased array radar. The rumors that is actually radar that brought down the Roswell thing, assuming it was real. You know, I don't have any evidence one way or the other, but my point is that's just another one of the stories we've heard that kind of fits in the why Bigelow would have been interested.
Right.
But if Bigelow would have found that, he would have stayed.
That's what I thought too.
Unless.
But there are those who believe that this same technology could also be used by DARPA as a new form of mind control. Like their counterparts at the CIA, DARPA-funded researchers have spent decades investigating how the human mind can be altered. In 1965, DARPA launched Project Pandora, which studied the possibility of using microwave radiation to control human behavior. The project reportedly ended in 1969, but DARPA's investigation of how machines can affect and possibly control the brain continues to this day.
So what's the next step? Maybe the next step is we can send instructions and information to an actual person from a distance with this kind of technology to let another person control their actions. But that could be something that could be malicious.
If there's some way to do it from a distance, a much greater distance than something that you can wear on your scalp, that would be the ultimate technological achievement that would fall into this realm of mind control and direct human-machine interface that DARPA may well want to keep secret.
Or could it be manipulated purposely by people who have the technology to simulate UFO sightings? And people say, well, of course not. Who would do a thing like that? Well, I would remind you that during the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the second coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms. Which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, you know, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
How interesting. I never heard of that.
Well, I think that's you know, a classic in psychological warfare, but that kind of manipulation is well understood, and I have personally investigated several apparently genuine UFO cases where there was in fact a manipulation. My conclusion, the conclusion of scientists working with me, was that there was in fact a manipulation taking place, and that it was not a hoax on the part of the witnesses, but a hoax on the part of somebody much better organized.
Another one we put on a UFO and was able to report like he had been abducted. You know, this is a case where he had not been, but UFO sightings were, popular at the time, particularly abduction scenarios. So that was one where, again, changing history could cause a new scenario and be able to describe the situation just as if it were real.
Was that an experiment, or was there a practical use for that?
No, that was, I hate to say experiment. A lot of this was, I mean, it wasn't consciously what we set up to do. It was more serendipitous. Here's the events. Who are we working with? What can we do? Who wants to, we were literally making it up as we went along.